and welcome to this supervision CEU. For this CEU, we're going to go through the changes to the supervision requirements that will come into effect in 2022. What you'll see here is a table summarising what the requirements will be for anyone sitting the exam after 2022. One of the first things to comment on is that the practicum and intensive practicum supervision requirements that have previously been in effect are no longer there. Both of these supervisions were previously attached to a verified course sequence. Now what we have is supervised fieldwork and concentrated supervised fieldwork. If we look at the supervised fieldwork first, you can see that the number of hours required to qualify is now 2,000 as opposed to the 1,500 hours that it currently is. If we look at the fieldwork hours that are required, per week it is going to be between 10 and 30. What is currently in effect is that the supervision hours are actually counted for the whole month, and you need a minimum of 20 to a maximum of 130. So this is going to be a bit of a change, that we now need to consider our supervision hours on a weekly basis as opposed to a monthly basis. Our supervisory period is a month, and it currently is also a month. So the supervisory period is not actually extending, but we need to consider those weekly hours within there. The percentage of field work that needs to be spent in supervision is 5%, which is actually exactly the same as it currently is. But one of the big changes is that you need to have 4 contacts with your supervisor per period, whereas currently you only require 2. One thing that isn't on this table is actually around the observations that are required as part of the BCBA supervision. So currently, each supervisee has to provide 2 observations per month. This is going to drop down to 1 observation needing to be provided. As you can see here, we have unrestricted activities. Now these have to account for at least 60% of supervised fieldwork hours. We're going to look at unrestricted activities in a couple of minutes. However, the current requirement is that it has to be at least 50%, so this is going to be an increase. The last part here is individual and small group supervision. So within 2022 requirements, it is the same as it currently is, and that is that group supervision can only account for up to 50% of the supervision in total. Now the concentrated supervised fieldwork is all listed there. Now this is no longer attached to a verified course sequence, and this means that someone is able to accrue their hours quicker as long as they're getting 10% of their hours supervised and they're having 6 contacts with a supervisor each month. This table looks at the requirements for someone who is working towards becoming a BCABA after 2022. A little bit like people who are working towards becoming BCBAs, the number of hours required to qualify is increasing. For this one, it's increasing to 1,300 hours from what it currently stands at 1,000. The rest of the changes for people working towards becoming BCABAs is actually exactly the same as what those changes are for BCBAs. 4 contacts a month, 5% of their supervised fieldwork hours, and needing to have between 10 and 30 hours per week. The reason we need to be aware of what the 2022 updates are now is because any supervisees that we start supervising who are likely to pass their exam after 2022 actually need to be following these requirements right now. So please pay attention to what they are and refer to the BCBA newsletters to keep up to date with these. Another thing that is actually going to be changing in 2022 is who can provide supervision. So after this date, any newly qualified BCBAs will not be able to supervise new people until they have been qualified for a year. Another thing that is going to be changing is for newly qualified BCBAs. Currently, if someone becomes a BCBA, they can start providing supervision immediately. After 2022, this is going to change, and they need to have been qualified for at least a year before they can start supervising others. There are some exceptions to this where it isn't possible for people to get supervision from someone who has been qualified for longer than a year. So some work environments, for example, Where this is the case, that newly qualified BCBA needs to get supervision from someone who has been qualified for at least 5 years. The final change to come into effect on 2022 is that Task List 5 is going to be implemented. Anyone who is going to sit their exam after this point needs to be following Task List 5. Anyone who is providing supervision or receiving supervision needs to be aware of these 3 terms: restricted, unrestricted and unacceptable. So firstly, restricted. This means any time that the supervisee is working directly with the client. These hours can only equate for up to 40% of the supervisee's independent hours. The next one is unrestricted, and this is any time that the supervisee is engaged in behaviour analytic work that is not directly with the client. So for example, analysing data sheets. The last one is unacceptable. Some examples of unacceptable hours could be attending health and safety training, reading a Jabber article that is not actually directly related to the case. So basically, this is any time that the supervisee is working on something not with the client and not linked directly to a case they're working on. We're now going to ask you some questions about those new fieldwork requirements to see whether we've got them all right. Okay, so the first question: when do you need to start following the new fieldwork requirements?